important that Africa sees itself as a regional bloc and then works together with a view to ensuring that it can drive both intra-Africa trade and trade between Africa and other regions of the world. The signing earlier this year of the Continental Free Trade Agreement, in my view, is a step in the right direction. And the benefits far outweigh the risks because it will help to bring down tariff barriers. It will help to encourage trade across the regions, which ultimately drives economic activity and economic growth. It's important that intra-Africa trade increases. It's currently well below 20%, compared to 59% in Asia, 69% in Europe, and ultimately it's due to artificial barriers, that basically restrict the movement of people, the movement of capital, the movement of goods and services across borders.
So when you listen to the quality of conversations that have gone on so far in this conference, what is your key takeaway?
The key takeaway is that people are desperate for change to come. And change in the sense that all stakeholders must be aligned to drive economic activity in Africa. So the legislator, the judiciary, the executives, the regulators, public sector, private sector, we must all work together to remove barriers to encourage greater economic activity on our continent. Right now, you find that sometimes policies are not in the right direction, policies that, the thinking is that it would rather raise government revenue, but ends up inhibiting business and reducing government revenue in the end. So I think that alignment of encouraging and driving economic growth on the continent is very important.
So when you look at how governments across Africa are positioning, formulating policies regarding trade, what's the level of engagement you would prefer with the private sector, especially when the policies are being formulated?
It's just continuous dialogue. I mean, if you listen to President of Ghana, and he will tell you that, since he came into office, that his government have been engaging continuously with the private sector to give them the message that they are there to assist the private sector and not to compete with the private sector. So I think continuous dialogue, because when you have the relevant stakeholders around a table discussing the key issues, they will arrive at a solution that addresses all the concerns of all the parties. And that solution is then what everybody will drive forward.
So when you look at the non-tariff barriers now regarding trade, I'd like to look at how we can better finance trade infrastructure. What's the role of the banks in this whole deal making?
The banks are there to provide financing, and to enable the flow of finance, to enable capital flows. So Standard Bank, for instance, present in 20 countries in Africa. We're also present in 6 international financial centers. We enable capital flows into Africa and across Africa. Ultimately, Africa needs capital, both foreign direct investments and foreign portfolio investments. Why? Because markets need liquidity, and markets also help to drive trade. So whether it's the foreign exchange markets, it's the capital markets, both debt and equity, the money markets, they all help to drive trade. And the deeper these markets are, the more liquid They are. So that, for instance, in Angola and in Nigeria, when both countries went into a recession on the back of commodity price decline, the lack of liquidity of foreign exchange, for instance, helped to hinder trade flows. But we've now seen a recovery in both economies, and Nigeria has, introduced an exchange rate regime that has allowed liquidity to flow back into the market. So making sure that our financial markets are deep and liquid is what Standard Bank does, and is what financial institutions should do to enable trade flows across the continent.
Yeah, well, we're looking to see those trade flows, increase. But what can be done to de-risk some of these trade transactions?
Yeah, so one obviously is access to financing, okay, because a lot of the transactions either are not completed because the parties involved are not able to complete the transactions due to a lack of funds. Also, verification of the actual transaction flows, in a way that there's confidence, to ensure the transactions go through. The infrastructure around trade, so whether it's ports, whether it's customs at land borders, all of these are hindrances to trade. And I think ourselves particularly, we engage in various fora that discuss how trade barriers can be brought down. Visas as well, across East Africa, West Africa, and to some extent Southern and Central, visa restrictions have been removed within those regions. But ultimately, it's to allow free movement of people, across Africa, because capital follows people. So if you allow the people to move around, invariably you will get capital and trade flowing across the continent.
I read a report from the UNECA talking about having 69 checkpoints, in a simple trade route between Lagos and Abidjan. When you look at, those are some other type of trade barriers that crop up, and I can imagine on the financial side how much it will cost a manufacturer who's bringing heavy goods and trying to, move them across the continent. What can be done to reduce some of these barriers and also reduce transaction costs?
Sure. Ultimately, you have to align everybody's interests, okay? Because these trade blocks or these barriers obviously are serving different interests. So the leaders of the various countries have to come together to see how do we incentivize our customs teams, our security people to have a faster throughput through our land borders, through our ports, and work an incentive structure out that the more cars and people they get across, they are rewarded in that way. So I think if we can have alignment, of all the relevant stakeholders, it will drive up economic activity significantly on our continent.
Finally, before I let you go, I just wanted to speak to what you expect from the next 2 days of this conference.
Oh, we expect more networking. We expect deals to be done, okay, interaction, and overall discussions as to what are the opportunities we have, across our markets. Because ultimately we have business people from across Africa who are here to actually explore opportunities, to see, what trade deals can be done, what other problems can be solved, and find creative ways of going about their business. But ultimately, it's about growing their business. It's about expanding beyond their markets, and seeing, how they can sort of reach other parts of Africa. So I'm very excited about the next 2 days. And on Wednesday, we have a day dedicated specifically to China, because the China-Africa in trade corridor is a huge opportunity, which we believe that Standard Bank is well positioned, to enable trade on that corridor.